Welcome to Ozark Country Cab Ride, an exciting journey across the BNSF Cuba Subdivision. We'll be both riding aboard a train and presenting action shots from alongside the tracks of this scenic line. Speaking of action, hang on to your hats as this hot westbound intermodal train rushes past our camera, whipping up a stiff breeze in its wake. We'll be riding aboard a train carrying the same symbol as this one, Q-STLCLO. Before we get underway, however, we'd like to present a brief history. These tracks were at one time the main line of the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad, more commonly known as the Frisco. The route was put down in the 1850s and 60s and reached Springfield in 1870. 110 years later, in 1980, the Frisco was merged into the Burlington Northern. With the exception of emergency use, the 240-mile route was not utilized to its potential by Burlington Northern. The line remained signaled and dispatched via CTC, an improvement that was made during World War II when the line saw traffic swell to historic highs. In 1996, the route became a part of Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and traffic was increased slightly. However, the role of this route seems to be as a safety valve for overflow traffic or for emergency use. During the Mississippi River floods of 1993, this was the first route to open south of Minnesota. In June of 1998, BNSF officials decided to shut down the Thayer Sub between Springfield and Memphis for extensive repair work. It was announced that for 12 days, the Cuba Sub would be utilized as a detour to handle part of the rerouted traffic. This caused us to take notice and to make tracks for Missouri to cover this highly scenic but underutilized line. We invite you to join us now for a ride across the Cuba Subdivision. We'll be riding in the cab of Burlington Northern SD40-2, number 8006. 3 of these old workhorses power the train today, and they are already coupled to the consist of intermodal cars. Engineer Cliff Phillips, with the railroad since 1966, proudly wears his Frisco hat. He invites us aboard and gives a brief description of the controls before we depart Lindenwood Yard.
Throttle, dynamic brake. This here is your automatic brake for your train line, the independent brake, and your reverser, which makes the train go reverse or forward. Headlights, all your gauges.
I'm there. Over.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. Here we go.
All right, everybody's in the clear. Okay, have a good trip.
You gotta watch these guys, you just don't know it. Who's telling the truth anymore, you know? This gauge here is your amperage gauge. Look how many amps is going through the traction motors. This is my coffee.
Our master of all trade. Come in over. Down in this Z train, this ZS or CSTLSTL. What do you need to do for that?
Cliff notches out the throttle and the train eases to life. As we depart BNSF's Lindenwood Yard, the tracks head up a grade leading out of the Mississippi River Valley. Once over the first hill, before arriving at East Valley Park, the line will come back down grade for level running. Between here and St. Clair, the Meramec River will be crossed 4 times. Between Eureka and Pacific, the tracks run alongside Union Pacific's former Missouri Pacific line to Kansas City. At Pacific, the Cuba Sub curves to the south to wind along the Meramec River Valley. West of Robertsville, we'll be meeting another train at Rook Siding. Shortly thereafter, the line crosses the Meramec for the last time and begins the climb up Iron Hill to come onto the Ozark Plateau. West of St. Clair, we'll update our progress with further map details. We continue climbing the grade out of town and run alongside Interstate 44. Since the railroad was here first, we can say that the highway follows the tracks most of the way to Springfield. This first portion of the line is double track and is controlled by absolute block signals and track warrants. After passing East Valley Park, the line will become single track and is dispatched by Centralized Traffic Control, or CTC. Picking up speed now, we come past the station at Webster Groves. The railroad cooperates with a local ordinance preventing the blowing of horns unless two trains are meeting one another or for an emergency. A 35-mile-per-hour speed restriction is in effect on this section of the line, but with 4 tons of train, we probably couldn't do much more. Over the top of the grade, the speed limit is raised to 45, and we're rolling right along now past the first online industry, a lumber yard. As we roll down grade, Cliff has engaged the dynamic brakes to hold us to track speed. Dynamic brakes use the drag of the traction motors to slow the train. In effect, the motors are turned into generators which create drag. The electricity generated is directed to a grid of resistors on the roof of the locomotive where it's dispersed as heat. Arriving at the end of double track at East Valley Park, the sign on the signal pole notifies crews that CTC begins here. After crossing the first of 4 bridges across the Meramec River, we come past the West Valley Park Y, leading to a Chrysler assembly plant. Automobile racks are stored along the main on a track called the Nest. We pass a large sand and gravel operation along the north side of the line and soon arrive at the end of the Nest. After passing milepost 23, track speed is increased to 55 miles per hour. Just ahead is the high span over the Meramec River near a location called Times Beach. In the distance, the Union Pacific Bridge can quickly be spotted. As we come off the bridge, we pass the beginning of 8,150-foot-long Eureka siding. Times Beach is located to the left. This is the spot made famous by dioxin contamination. The area has been cleaned and is now open as a regional park. Passing through the town of Eureka, we run alongside the Union Pacific tracks for the next 6 miles to Pacific. Maximum speed on the Cuba Sub is 60, unless otherwise posted. We're doing about that speed now, but don't get used to it, as a surprise waits for us just ahead. A yellow board stares us in the face and is totally unexpected. Cliff safely drops our speed down to the restricted and prepares to come to a complete stop. A tamper was working earlier and has probably knocked a connecting wire off the tracks, which caused the problem. Since we had to come to a complete stop and flag through the red board ahead, we'll take this opportunity to present our first ground shot along the Cuba Sub.
Repeat, no defect. Total axle 226. BNSF. Detector out.
A westbound steel train is viewed as it comes past the exposed rock cliffs at Pacific and curves to the south away from the Union Pacific line. Back aboard the Q-STLCLO, we have passed the red signal, but now must operate at a restricted speed until arriving at the next signal displaying green. We cross the third bridge over the Meramec and will soon come to the anticipated green signal. Once we're past that, Cliff opens the throttle to get us moving once more. After passing through Catawissa, we soon arrive at a deep cut and overpass at Robertsville. A speed restriction once again has us down to a slow pace as we lazily roll along the banks of the Meramec. The next passing track is Rook Siding at milepost 44. The yellow over red signal tells us that we'll be meeting another train here, but that will be staying on the main. Cliff attempts to reach the eastbounder on the radio, and we listen as they respond.
Where you at?
Down here, Brook, wait.
Oh, I'll be quick. We're leaving St. Clair.
Indicating that they're about 5 miles away, we magically compress the time and watch as the train arrives at West Rook. The M-TULSTL is powered with a total of 4 units. 2 SD40-2s lead a GE cabless B unit, a B30-7. Trailing is a real treat, a Santa Fe rebuilt Jeep 9R. Cliff has released the brakes and we now drift toward the end of the siding while waiting for the dispatcher to align the switch. The green signal appears, and with that, Cliff notches out the throttle to get us moving. The fourth and final crossing of the Meramec River is complete, and we roll along at a good clip toward the bottom of Iron Hill. This grade will bring us out of the river valley onto the Ozark Plateau at the town of St. Clair. On the 1.4% grade now, the 3 SD40-2s are doing a superb job of keeping us moving at or near the 45 mile per hour speed limit. Rated at 3,000 horsepower, the combined 9,000 horses pulled the train right along in the 8th throttle position. With a train weight of nearly 4,000 tons, the horsepower per ton ratio is around 2.25, more than adequate for the Cuba Sub. If you haven't noticed by now, much of the line is still laid with jointed rail, an important indicator of the low traffic density across the subdivision. Making the transition to another ground shot, we watch as that train of steel coils works up Iron Hill. The heavily laden train is doing about the same speed as our train, and the two GEs are in firm control of the trailing loads. This train would normally be operated across the Thayer Sub from Memphis to Springfield. The UBIR-PIT originated in Birmingham, Alabama, and is headed to Pittsburgh, California. The train will go through Denver and across Colorado, Utah, and Nevada on trackage rights over Union Pacific's former Rio Grande and Southern Pacific routes. Back aboard the intermodal train, we continue to make good speed as we pass through the town of St. Clair. That was a yellow over red signal we just passed and indicates that another meet is about to unfold at St. Clair Siding. Cliff knocks the throttle down and begins to dump air, gently easing the freight to a crawl as we meet our eastbound counterpart, the Q-STL. It's a surprise to see a C30-7 on the intermodal train. We really didn't expect to see older power on these trains at all, including our 3 SD40-2s. On another day at St. Clair, we watch as a westbound freight arrives at the top of the hill. Like us, it'll be meeting another train here, but the freight will be taking the siding. One of the reasons we wanted to cover the Cuba Sub during the rerouting of traffic was to capture the mix of BN and Santa Fe power in a variety of different paint schemes. It may not be pretty, but it is history in the making, and will someday be looked on as an important era in American railroading. At West St. Clair, we watch as another Q-STLO arrives to meet the St. Louis to Tulsa freight. The former Santa Fe C-30-7 is a leased engine from the Livingston Rebuild Center in Montana. After passing through St. Clair, the tracks come alongside I-44. For much of the way between here and Springfield, the highway will be fairly close to the tracks. From here to Rolla, the line passes through several small towns spaced evenly along the route. The tracks dip and climb through hogbacks and twist around sharp curvature as they traverse the rolling Ozark Plateau. The subdivision's namesake town, Cuba, is located along this portion of the line. It's here that the lead line subdivision departs for the 43-mile trip south to Buick. As the name suggests, the line was built to tap lead mines in that area. At one time, the eastern half of the Cuba Sub was called the Rolla Sub. This was back when Newburgh was the division point. The train comes down into the swale of one of those famous hogbacks. Running through here requires engineers to be constantly alert to prevent slack action from running in and out of the train. A broken coupler knuckle is an embarrassing situation, one most crews would prefer to avoid. The weight of the consist shoves us part way out of the dip, but it soon becomes necessary to apply throttle to keep the train rolling upgrade at an even speed. We continued the climb up the other side of the swale to come up around one more rise in the ever-changing landscape. Located just east of Sullivan, after passing under the Highway 185 overpass, will come through the town of 5,600 people. One of the most frightening things that can happen to a train crew occurs when people pull around crossing gates or try to beat a train at a grade crossing. It's always white knuckle time when passing through towns, as one never knows what to expect. One of the men in this train told us of killing a 16-year-old girl at the second crossing just a few years back. If people knew the terror they cause train crews when they pull out in front of them, maybe they'd think twice the next time. That is, if they're lucky to have a next time. We made it through town this time without incident. After hearing the crew's description of grade crossing accidents, we'll have white knuckles too each time we approach a grade crossing. It really is a scary thought. Many train crews suffer for years over accidents they have witnessed and couldn't prevent. At the top of another hog-back, Cliff reduces the throttle to an idle and prepares to apply dynamic brake as we come down the other side of the rise. I-44 also dips through the hogbacks, but unlike the tracks, the highway goes straight up and down the undulating countryside. The tracks must follow a more gentle path between the ridges and the swales. As we come around this curve, we'll be passing through the hamlet of Bourbon, located at mile 74. The view from ground level shows more curvature than what we saw from the train. This is in part due to different lens settings, but the perspective from the train is really quite different. On a foggy morning shortly after sunrise, we catch an eastbound Q train approaching the siding at West Coffeyton. Coming into Cuba now, we'll soon be passing the small yard located along the left side of the tracks. This is where traffic is interchanged between the lead line sub and the Cuba Sub. 3 Santa Fe Jeeps are parked at the west end near the yard office. Cliff applies more throttle now to keep the train moving up grade through Cuba at track speed. West of Cuba, we roll along the relatively flat country and enjoy a break from the hogbacks. Don't get used to it though, since the really serious terrain still lies ahead. Approaching the siding at Rosati, we come past a nice-looking lake. Vineyards and a winery are located in this vicinity. We won't be meeting another train at Rosati, but on another day we did catch a meet here. A Tulsa, Oklahoma to Birmingham, Alabama detour train waits at East Rosati for the arrival of a St. Louis to Clovis Q train. We get another great view toward the rear as we come around the gentle curve before arriving at St. James. Look for the town's old depot halfway through town on the right. As we head back into open country now, we'll be passing over a trackside warning detector at mile 101.8. There are a total of 9 detectors on the Cuba Sub. Look to the left and you'll get a quick view of a boy with what appears to be his grandmother waving to the train crew. West of Dillon Siding, we catch a Tulsa-bound freight working up grade toward Rollin. This Memphis, Tennessee to Tulsa, Oklahoma freight is one of the detour trains that normally would be operating over the Thayer Sub. The steep grade has seriously slowed the heavy train's progress into Rollin, located 3 miles ahead. As we come through Rolla, we'll be passing a couple of railroad artifacts displayed in a city park. Look to the right for steam locomotive 1501. sister to the famous 1522, the restored and operating icon of the Frisco Railroad. People in these parts still fondly remember and revere the days of the Frisco. It's white knuckle time once again as the engineer blows the air horns for the many grade crossings in downtown Rollin. On the west side of town, near a strip of fast food joints and motels, the tracks dip into a deep cut and begin the descent down Rolla Hill. For the next 6 miles, Cliff will be working the dynamic brakes to hold the train back on this long grade. After reaching the flats at the bottom of the hill, we'll pass through the little community of Newburgh, once the railroad's division point between St. Louis and Springfield. The line continues along Little Piney Creek to Jerome, where it crosses the Gasconade River. From here, the tracks begin the long climb out of the river valley, up a steep grade to Dixon. West of Dixon, hog-back country returns as the line works up this hill and down another toward Sleeper. One S-curve after another causes engineers to remain alert. The beautiful scenery through here is fantastic, and most visitors would agree that it's the best part of the Cuba Sub. With dynamic brakes applied, we continue the ride down Rolla Hill through cuts and around curves. Having reached the bottom of the hill, we now run along Little Piney Creek. Newburgh will be coming up in just a minute. Newburgh was truly a railroad town back when the Frisco was here. Almost everyone worked for the railroad. Remnants of the yard can still be seen to the left. Each year the town hosts the Newburgh Days Festival. It just happens to be that time of year, and we get a view of the activities as we roll by. Not too much is happening at this time of the day. In the evening, there will be a lot more activities in Newburgh. The town marks the halfway point between St. Louis and Springfield and is the reason the town was located here. At West Newburgh, the line returns to single track. Just ahead is a full Y at a spot called Bundy Junction. Here, a track from the U.S. Army installation at Fort Leonard Wood connects with the Cuba Sub. A significant amount of freight continues to be shipped in and out of the fort. The west leg of the Y comes into view near milepost 122. Bundy Junction marks the eastern limits of the local freight that operates out of Springfield. Cars being delivered to the fort are scheduled for this job twice a week, but even more often when necessary.
BNSF, detector, milepost 120.8. No descent. No descent. Code accuracy 226. BNSF, detector out.
We're about to pass under Interstate 44 and will then come by a place called Arlington. We'll then immediately cross over the Gasconade River at Jerome to begin the long climb out of the river valley. cliff notches out the throttle as the climb begins. Before we get into the meat of the hill, however, we view that Tulsa-bound train seen earlier as it crosses over the rain-swollen Gasconade. In Run 8 now, we pass rock outcroppings where the line was cut into the side of the steep hillside. We'll soon be turning away from the river to climb around the hills on a lengthy but gentler path back onto the Ozark Plateau. This is called Dixon Hill, and it's rated at an uncompensated 1.6%, which makes it the ruling grade for westbound trains on the Cuba Sub. If a train can make it up this hill, then it should make all the others across the line. That pile of rocks to the left will be our shooting platform as we view another train tackling Dixon Hill from the ground. Picking up where we departed, we pass under State Route D as we depart the river valley and head for higher ground. We're now passing through an area called Franks. At one time, there was a long siding located here. As we pass mile marker 132, we're reminded that 2.5 more miles remain before reaching Dixon. We're now on the steepest part of the grade. A bald spot to the left marks the location where the old right-of-way climbed the hill. The new roadbed makes a less severe approach to Dixon. At a point just up around the next curve, one can still see pilings where the old line passed over top of the new route. The new line was an improvement completed during World War II. A pole to the left marks the location where the old line crossed over the top of the new. If one hikes here, the old line is still clearly visible. The cinder ballast is still in place where we viewed the line. Cliff skins the throttle back as most of the train's weight has now conquered Dixon Hill. The old saying, "What goes up must come down," applies to railroading too. Cliff has already kicked in the dynamics to hold us back on this downhill grade. We make note of the approaching overpass and think that it would make a good location for another ground shot. Several days later, we returned and made good use of the overhead bridge, catching an eastbound working up the hill toward Dixon. Detour train M-TULBIR comes around the curve to pass under the bridge. We hold the main at the next siding west of Dixon called Jury. This is a location where it's possible to look back at most of the train. Hard as we tried, though, we couldn't catch a glimpse of the rear end. West of the siding, we're into a hog-back, and Cliff has to use some throttle to lift the train over the next ridge. Just beyond that, we come through the town of Crocker. The lead unit leans into the curve, and from the ground we look out across the hogback as a St. Louis to Tulsa freight traces our route. Heat rises off the dynamic brakes, but as the train nears our position, the throttle is open to bring the freight across the next ridge. At Swedenborg, the dispatcher has lined us into the 6,443-foot siding for a meet with the Tulsa to Birmingham detour train. A look to the rear shows the trailing consist obediently following us into the siding. A look ahead finds the eastbound approaching with a brand new diesel on the point. It's another one of the General Electric C44s that has not yet had lettering or trim applied to the basic BNSF paint job. We continue to roll through the siding at the maximum permitted speed. Soon, however, we're back out on the high iron and roll along at a good clip. Near Richland, the tracks and State Route 133 follow one another like a matched set. At East Richland, we found a rare spot along this part of the Cuba Sub where one can get back from the tracks for an unobstructed pan shot. The Tulsa to Memphis merchandise train is a pretty sight in the early morning light of this June day. Back aboard the Q train, we come around a curve at the end of the siding and prepare for an assault on downtown Richland. A Memphis to Kansas City, Kansas detour train stomps through downtown Richland on this quiet Sunday afternoon. Stoutland, with a population of 207, offers little to a visiting rail fan. Its only claim to fame is the 6,333-foot siding that passes through town and the silly-looking water tower we just passed on the left. Approaching the end of the siding, Cliff again skins the throttle back a couple of notches in preparation for a dip into another hogback. West of Stoutland, the line drops lower as we start to leave the more serious hills behind us. The westbound Q-STLCLO, with the B23-7 on the point, snakes down around an S-curve at Railroad Road. Shooting right into the afternoon sun, we're no longer able to get the great-looking shots available when we had the light to our backs or to the side. We're in the home stretch now and are ready to complete the final 60 miles into Springfield. Lebanon, the second largest city on the route after Rolla, is a growing industrial town with several online businesses. Just before Phillipsburg, we'll cross to the south side of I-44 for the remainder of the trip. While this portion of the journey traverses flatter country, there is still plenty of great scenery ahead. At Northview, the tracks pass around a huge curve, and the area is open enough that we'll finally get a quick peek at the last car in the train. Approaching Lebanon, it's once again white knuckle time. The city has a bad reputation for crossing violations, and Cliff is anxious to get through town.
Here we go.
We've swung around to a southerly heading and now benefit from the sun being off to our right side. This illuminates the foliage for a nicer view ahead. After passing over Interstate 44, the tracks immediately come through the small hamlet of Phillipsburg. A talking trackside warning detector is located here at mile 193.8, and we rush past the device. It counts the number of axles passing by, checks for dragging equipment, and for hot bearings. Nearly 2 miles after the head end passes the detector, it announces its findings, and we listen to the transmission.
BNSF detector, milepost 193.8. No defects. Repeat, no defects. Total axle 226. BNSF detector out.
Just west of Conway, we catch the St. Louis to Tulsa freight seen earlier. The gray GP7 is a leased engine owned by a fiber optic construction company. They use the locomotive to pull a cable-laying train along railroad right-of-ways. When not needed for construction, the engine is available for lease. We get a high green at Niangua and continue our westbound journey. There will be no more meets for us today. Population of this small community is 459. The landscape has become relatively flat now, and we're able to make good time across this portion of the line. The line has curved to the west again and now heads us directly into the sun as we pass Trackside Industries at Marshfield. At Northview, trains sweep around the largest curve on the subdivision. Starting east of here, just beyond our view, the curvature continues west for the next 2.5 miles. Before entering the curve, trains are headed southwest. Through Northview, the line turns nearly due north, and then, with only the smallest section of tangent track, suddenly changes direction and comes around more than 90 degrees back to the southwest. This is the one place where crews can catch a glimpse of the rear of their trains, if not too long. As we pass through town and the beginning of the siding, the tracks swing around toward the north. Watch the shadows for a reference as we pass through the big curve. At this point, the sun shines brightly on our consist as we curve from the northwest to the west. A view out across the open fields gives us a look back at the train. Shadows now come across the cars as we continue to curve to the southwest. A quick glimpse through the trees shows the last car at the rear of the train.
That is correct, over.
The Exotic Animal Paradise is a private zoo located just east of Springfield. Trains passing the 400-acre park often exhibit their own type of exotic critter. These beasts easily win our attention over the park animals. Check out the second unit in this Memphis to Denver detour train. At Teed, junction with the Thayer Sub, the dispatcher switches us onto the North Main track. With the Thayer Sub rebuilding project underway, rows of ballast hoppers and strings of tie cars are parked on all available track space in the Springfield area. Upon arriving in Springfield, we see that the yardmaster has lined us all the way through the Broad Street crossovers to the far track. This route will place us on Long 4 South, the southernmost track. It'll take us directly to the yard office where another crew will take over for the run to Tulsa. A third crew will run from there to Avard, Oklahoma, and a fourth crew will handle the train to Amarillo, Texas. A fifth and final crew will handle the train into Clovis, New Mexico, the destination for this symbol. From there, the consist will be classified for West Coast locations and placed on other trains. As we pass the engine facility, we note the amount of power available. There's quite a variety of both engine types and paint jobs, everything from variations of the BN Cascade green scheme to both blue and yellow Santa Fe and red and silver war bonnets. There's even a couple of repaints in the new orange and dark green BNSF scheme. Cliff exhibited superb execution of his train handling skills today. At no time did we experience a bump or jerk from slack running in or out of the consist. That's an accomplishment he can be proud of, his 32 years of experience showing through. Two SW 1500 yard switchers rolled by, coupled nose to nose, as was common on the Frisco. The train comes to a smooth stop right in front of the yard office to bring our journey to a close. The BNSF Cuba Subdivision is certainly not one of the busier main lines the company operates, but it definitely was a fun one to ride, and a scenic line worthy of more attention from photographers. One train you can count on is the eastbound local out of Springfield in the morning. On this day, we got lucky and found a pumpkin on the point, a great way to conclude our visit to the Cuba Subdivision.